Good morning, good afternoon and good evening, wherever you're watching this podcast. This is the 80/20 Performance Podcast by me, Matthew Lambert. And I'm delighted today to be joined by the CEO and co-founder and the regional MD of Horizontal Digital, one of our top strategic partners in the region, Sabin and George. Lovely to see you. And I'm delighted because, do you know what? You're the first of the inaugural podcast with us.
So we're your favourite, man.
Well, I can't say favourite, but the reason we're doing this podcast, and I think it's important for everyone to understand right from the start, is because I've been very interested in the whole Pareto law model since I was recruited by a recruitment firm in London. And it basically said that 80% of wealth comes from 20% of the population. It's the philosopher Pareto. And I've applied that in my career, 20 plus years. And I get the best job in Salesforce. I get to work with the top partners in the region. We have 300 partners, as you know, and you're in our top 10, okay? And I see in each business, depending on what the business is, big or small, specific industries or not, they have the same sort of, there's some themes that run across them, and it's the 80/20. And I wanted this podcast to really showcase that, and I thought what better way to do is to have the partners that I manage, number one. I'm also going to talk to our top customers, and I'm going to talk to the net new talent that we're hiring into the ecosystem. And I know that you've actually helped me go and talk to some universities, and I'll talk about that later in the series. But for today, I just wanted to get a starter from you guys, and I wanted to really understand how it started for you, your careers, a little bit of background. So for the audience that don't know you, Sabin, you founded Horizontal. Tell me about it. Who is Horizontal? Who is Sabin?
So my name is Sabin Ephrem. First of all, thank you, Matt, for having us. Delighted to be in your 20%.
Yes.
I started Horizontal about 25 years ago. Prior to that, of about 3 decades of consulting experience. And it started in Minnesota, which is where our headquarters is. And it was a breakthrough opportunity that really drove me to start Horizontal Digital. 25 years ago, when Salesforce started, I had the opportunity to build something very similar to Marketing Cloud for a very large software company. And that's where I met my business partners, and that's the story of Horizontal Digital today. So basically go in a back room with 7 developers and build a Marketing Cloud project from the ground up, but not on the cloud because there was no cloud in those days.
Right.
And that really opened my eyes into the opportunity, the convergence between digital and technology and marketing, and how technology products like that could help drive the digital journey ahead. And digital was fairly new back then as well.
Sure.
It was a tipping point for businesses as well, going digital. So that's really the founding of Horizontal Digital. I was independent for a few years before that, but this was the breakthrough opportunity that allowed me to take it further than just me,
Yes.
So I was fortunate to have met my partners there, and then we built the story from there on. And 25 years later, we're here. We're glad to be in the 20% of the Salesforce partners, and excited.
Fabulous. And your 25 years we're into the similar age with Salesforce, aren't we, as well?
Yes. So 25 years of Salesforce,
yes.
25 years of Horizontal Digital. Same.
And you've recently moved to the region, or you're here a lot more anyway?
I'm here a lot more because obviously the region is experiencing the highest growth in the world. And so is Salesforce.
Yes.
I think the opportunity in Saudi Arabia is tremendous for Salesforce. So I decided to spend most of my time. I'm not permanently here, but I've got to be with the family a bit too, and the U.S. offices. But I spend most of my time in the region, supporting whatever we need to do for the channel, for our customers, and for the delivery teams as well.
Thank you very much. And this man to your right was your employee number 1 for Dubai, correct?
Yes.
So George.
Yeah, he came into Minnesota on a very stormy winter day, and but then he was happy that I was sending him to the warm and beautiful sunny Dubai. So he did accept the offer when he knew the location.
I wouldn't have moved to Minneapolis. Like 3 foot of snow in the airport, I would have just turned around and gone back home.
Yeah.
But,
so George, you are a Geordie and you are in Dubai. Tell us the George story.
I first moved to the region, Dubai, in 2002, and then I left for a bit, moved to Saudi Arabia, moved back here, moved to Malaysia for a bit, moved to Australia a bit, then I went back to the UK, and I'm running this, big agency in London, lots of glamour, lots of great, and somehow this man here has convinced me to come to some crazy startup where there was just, day one, arrive, and there's like, okay, need to find an office, need to paint the walls, need to buy some furniture, and just sitting in a room. I remember after a few months sitting in a room thinking, what have I done? Like, no one would take my call. Like, we didn't have it. But, we built it up slowly. And post-COVID, for the last 4 or 5 years, we've got a compound annual growth rate of 114%, which means, every December, we're more than twice the size we were in January, and we're doing that profitably. So we're, more than doubling each year. And so, it's been great. It's been a crazy journey, and in part driven by the growth that Sabin's talking about in the region and within Salesforce, and in part hopefully driven by, some of the 20% that exists in horizontal that drives
absolutely. And you referenced the 80-20, so thank you for that. So how does the 80-20 model work for you? Like, have you seen that working in your business? I mean, I think about the customers or your staff or your delivery or the deal sizes. Can you help the audience understand that a little bit more?
The reality is that I think that as a heuristic, the 80-20 principle applies undoubtedly.
Yes.
And the most important thing to us, I think, not the only way that applies, but the most important thing is always culture, right? When you're a services business, unlike Salesforce, in Salesforce there's a bit of the business that interacts with customers, but the big bit of business is the bit that makes a product. We don't have any product, we just have people. And so you've really got to ask yourself this kind of fundamental question, which is, why would a customer ever work with you? Why would a brand who can buy their license direct from Salesforce and hire a project manager, a developer, a technical architect, a creative, a data scientist, why would they ever choose to work with horizontal or another services business? And zeroing in on what is the value you offer. And fundamentally, there are two sort of sources of value that you can offer a client, a brand trying to do transformation on Salesforce. One of them is to say, look, we can just offer you cheaper resources. And that doesn't always necessarily mean sort of lower quality. Even a big SI, for example, will essentially be offering in part lower transaction costs. If you need 200 smart graduates on your doorstep tomorrow, that's a pretty expensive thing to do through recruitment agents. But a big SI can sort of do that. So there's lots of opportunity to offer lower resourcing costs. However, our model is to go for the other version. Say, look, we're not necessarily here to lower the cost of your resource. We're here to change the outcome of your project. We're here to say the transformation you're going through is strategically important and probably too complex for them to do them just on their own.
Yes.
Just get some bums on seats. What you need is a trusted partner who can meaningfully advise and change the outcome of that project. And in order to do that, what you need are is not just people, because why would someone take Matthew? If you're an employee of ours and you're a developer, and why would a client pay 150% of your salary basically if they hire you directly just to take that through horizontal?
Yes.
The reason is because we would wrap you in that methodology, that support network, that approach, and that sort of strategic point of view that changes the outcome of the project. And that speaks, I think, directly to your Pareto principle, which is, in essence, of course, everyone adds value, but in essence, what we see is 80% of the value of the solutioning, and importantly, 80% of the sort of the culture is really driven by a core of people. Because really, what differentiates us is not that we have some special trick where we can code quicker, but we can fundamentally, wrap those people in a methodology and approach and a culture and a safe space where they can actually excel and do the best work of their life. And that all comes down to culture, and that's driven by a core group of people who enforce those standards, who believe in what we're trying to do, who are passionate about the principles that we are trying to do, and ultimately care for the client and drive that success for the client. And yes, that has to come through everyone, but we all know there's a certain amount of leadership to that, and really thinking about who are those people, what is not just the individuals and their skills, but what is that team dynamic and the culture, and who are the 20% that's really going to drive that forward. Does that make sense?
That makes absolute sense. And actually, I love that you talked about the people side of things, because I always say in all my career, it's people by people. So we have Salesforce is the number one CRM in the world, and it's a phenomenal product. And we talk about it all day, every day. But it's the people that are using it. So you might have an amazing transformational strategy as a business, but if you don't take the people on that journey with you, it won't go anywhere. And that's from the smallest projects to the biggest projects, and I've seen that across the board. Same question to you, Sabin, I suppose,
Yeah.
the 80-20 principle in your... And maybe if we can liken it to a deal, or has there been a significant deal in your career
Yeah.
that you could think about?
No, I agree with George. Everything that he said. The way I look at it is, 20% of the attributes that our team demonstrates. There is obviously a lot of other things behind the scenes in terms of doing the work, but there are some core attributes, which is about 20%. A lot of people forget about that, is what's driving most of our business, right? And I look at it as being obsessed about the customer, right? Focusing on their business problem, and making sure you're not just putting technology together, but actually solving problems, creating outcomes and ROI for them. Just so thinking in that DNA within the company, the core people need to think that way, and then everything is driven down. Delivery excellence, meaning that you can actually, put some pen to paper or punch the keyboard and build amazing solutions that work great. And then also being honest and transparent with our customers. The trust is the most important thing, not just with our customers, but also with our channel and internally with our own people, right? Building that bond and relationship. So those are sort of 20% of the core attributes for us that drive that 80% rule. Everything else sort of is a byproduct. It trickles from there as long as you maintain those principles when you're driving the organization.
Perfect, thank you. And this is your chance to talk about horizontal specifically as well. So if you were going to go back in time and do it all again, so you've been doing it for 25 years, and George, you've been doing it now for what?
Being with Sabin for 7 years.
Yeah. So 25, if you could do it all again, would you do it the same, or what have you learned in that period?
First of all, I would do it over and over again.
Right.
Because
Brilliant.
there is so much that you learn in the journey,
Yes.
even if you have done it once before,
Right.
from both your successes and your failures, right? And it's just the best learning opportunity of learning everything about, you're not just practicing a trade, you're learning much more than that.
Yeah.
From people to process to different systems to different disciplines. You really have to master it all. So there's no better place to learn it. Would it be the same thing? Again, it depends on when this is going to happen, right? I mean, technology changes so much,
Yes.
and it's going to change so much down the road. I don't have a crystal ball, but I for sure know that it will be technology, because you also have to do what you know.
Yeah.
Would it be services? I don't know, but for sure it will be some sort of work where I'm consulting, because I've been a consultant for 3 decades.
Yeah.
That's my DNA. That's what I know, is going in and solving problems, applying technology. So it remains to be seen what that is, but I would absolutely do it over and over again.
Fabulous. Thank you for your contribution to the Salesforce ecosystems too. And George, same question, I suppose. You've had a grazing career. Would you do it all again? Would you change? What would you change from a performance point of view?
Yeah, look, I mean, similar to answer to Sabin in one sense, which is,
Yeah.
I've long been of the view that at some point I'm going to have, grandchildren, hopefully not for a while, and they're going to be sitting on my knee and they're going to say, "Hey, Grandad, I can't believe you're around at the advent of the interweb, right?
Yeah.
The internet." I mean, when I went to university in 1996, 99,
Yeah.
I remember leaving and like going, "Oh, Hotmail, I need
Yeah.
an email address. That sounds like a thing," and and that was the beginning of it all. And we're at this incredibly interesting inflection point where, for a couple hundred years, there was an industrial revolution that was driven fundamentally by a sense that competitive advantage was increasingly within production. There were two philosophers that defined the Industrial Revolution.
Yeah.
One was Karl Marx, one was Adam Smith. One said it was good, one said it was bad, but they both said the same things. If you want to make money in an industrial economy, you own the means of production. You buy a factory, lots of capital, throw lots of people into it, economies of scale, that's how you make money. Because it was all about the efficient production of a thing,
Yeah.
A big factory line. Well, that's great, but what digital did is it changed all of that. It said your competitive advantage is no longer in a kind of Henry Ford model where you can have any color car you want as long as it's black. It's not about the efficient production, or not only, because reality is we could all come up with an idea now, send it to some guy in China or wherever it might be, and he can make that, even with tariffs probably, he can make that a lot quicker and cheaper than the guy with a factory down the road. The reality now is a competitive advantage for most industries, and indeed even public sector, has switched from efficient production through to effective consumption, giving people what they want across time, across channel, across device. personalised, co-created products, not just efficiently produced, but tailored to them and to their needs. It's that consumption experience, that customer experience that changes their behaviour. And of course, AI just adds to that, where it goes beyond simply production through to consumption, but actually now through to the orchestration of a relationship and the decisioning around that. And so to have not had a career based in that revolution, that digital revolution, that economic change, gee, that would have been quite the miss. And I think similarly about this region. I mean, I've lived here off and on since 2002, and I think that if I lived 150 years ago, maybe I'd have been in Manhattan, and because that looked crazy, right? Maybe a couple hundred years, back in London or something. But now there is really no more exciting time to have spent at least some of your career than here in the Middle East, a place of unbelievable generational change and ambition and excitement, just somewhere so much cultural significance. So all of that in whatever guise I would have done somewhere the same. Obviously, I would have had a better boss than Sabin. But I think that the one thing I would say is that I think is that all of the it's not that we would have made any decisions differently, or at least from my view, is that actually once you know those decisions and you know the impact of those decisions, like for example, who are the 20% that drive 80% of the value? What are the kind of, or similarly with our clients as well, there are certain clients who are right for us and we're right for them, and likewise not.
Absolutely,
so how do you qualify harder? There are always two things I tell the sales guys, which are we're looking for projects with clients that are strategically important, because they've got we look for projects that cannot fail because of our positioning. We're here to change the outcome, so it needs to be a project that can't fail. And the other thing that's really important in our qualification, other than obviously it needs to be on Salesforce, is it needs to be too complex for the client to do it themselves. If a client can do it themselves, like I said at the beginning, they will simply hire the people directly. It will be more efficient. They'll run it themselves. Why would they not? They have to be in a place where they're saying, okay, this project cannot fail, and I know that we are not going to get this done internally. What we need is someone who can help us and advise us. Not an order taker, like a waiter. Oh, sure, what would you like? A CRM, I'll go at the back and rustle one of them up. But someone who can say, if this was my money, Mr. Client, this is how I would spend it, and this is how I would phase my transformation, not just in process of creation and build, but in a process of change throughout your organization. Because if you get it right, and if you find that right organization that's trying to do genuine transformation, then like a virus that infects the host, it's not about the system itself, but it's about how you change the internal behaviors and perceptions and ways of working within that organization. And then that genuinely begins to speak to the change from production to consumption and different forms of competitive advantage for that business. And so I just think it's not that I think that from my side I would do anything different. It's that I would wish I would have figured out what was important earlier, qualified harder, gone at it, and if anything, been on more the lunatic fringe of knowing what needed to be done and driving that through. But, how would you have known that unless you lived through it once, right?
Well, as you were talking as well, and I'm thinking, so as you know, that we about 3 years ago we started the University Trailblazer program, which is where I went to a university. One of the alumni of that university was working in a partner. They said, would you like to go to my university and tell them about Salesforce? And 3 years later, we've now working with 20 universities. I've got 6 or 7 partners engaged in those universities, taking on interns. So for the interns, the students, the potential new employees of your business and our ecosystems businesses, what message would you give that net new talent? You're just talking about it, if you'd have known back in the day. What would you say to those students now that are studying right here, right now, maybe year 3 or year 2, whatever it is, that are going to go for a career in Salesforce ecosystem? Sabin?
No, I mean, I think there's a lot of change happening. Obviously, if they're here, from what I see, I mean, this is a region that is very ambitious, right? And investing very heavily all the way down from the royal family in terms of being progressive when it comes to technology and adoption, and specifically around AI. I mean, they're the first country to have an AI minister. And they've made significant commitment to be the top from an AI innovation perspective. And you can see it, they're putting money where it needs to. So for people, the students in this region, it's very important for them to go through the training, understand the relevance of AI, because at the end of the day, if you're not driving the masses that live in this country, that are citizens of the country, all the enablement is for them, right? So until they are able to consume, understand, absorb it's no good, right? If the government is rolling out things that are driven off AI to be more efficient, the kids and the people here, the upcoming generation, need to understand why, the change that's happening, and the change is going to happen in every facet of their life. So the kids that are going to school need to understand where the world is going. And Salesforce is a big part of it. These are folks that could be running large Salesforce programs in some of the large enterprises here, using Salesforce AI technologies to innovate within businesses.
That's right.
So all the university things, Matt, that you're doing, I think is very critical, because adoption is driven by the masses.
Absolutely,
that consume it.
And as I said to all the university students when I see them, I say, listen, go online, download Trailhead, start learning, so that when you have the interview, whether it be with Horizontal or any of the other partners that we've got in the ecosystem, or the end customer, so we have 1,500 plus customers in the region. If you want a job in the Salesforce ecosystem, download Trailhead. Show the employer that you're going to have the interview with that you've started learning, you understand what we're talking about. If you've got a particular want for a discipline, whether it be marketing or consultancy or development, or whether it's an industry play, whether you want to be in retail or you want to be in whatever industry it might be, start to learn that. Evolve yourself whilst you're studying in your university. George, what would you say to the students of the future?
3 things. First thing I'd say, and there's a danger this is projecting.
Yes.
It was a long time since I've been at university, or I suppose, Matt, right? Even longer for Sabin. And I think, what I'd say is 3 things. It's, certainly when I was at university, the myth that I had, the great myth, is that business is boring. Business is not boring. Like, this is the activity, right? I mean, how do you shape things and change things? And there's something incredible at the heart of business and heart of free trade, which is what a game theorist would call a zero-sum game. That ultimately, in a free trade where we both have the opportunity to transact, if you're the client and I'm the service business, or if you're Salesforce and I'm the client, I'm only going to give you my money if what you give me, your license key, is more valuable to me than that money, and you're only going to take it if you can produce it for lower than the money I'm going to give you for it. And so we both win. The great myth is, if you can convince someone, to your point about sales, if you can get to a place of saying, not some sort of tricky, sort of crafty, lying way, but get to a place of helping understand the value of the thing that you are selling, and someone's willing to actually give you that money for it. You would prefer the money, they would prefer the software or the services.
Correct.
And everyone benefits. There is no loser, and that's exciting. And your chances now are unrivaled to do entrepreneurial things like Sabin as a trendsetter. It's even easier now. And so, first thing is, I'd say, don't for 1 minute think that business is boring and all just about spreadsheets and cubicles and whatever dullness. There is excitement to be had, especially internationally. The second thing I'd say is that even to your 80-20 principle.
Yes.
The reality is that the 80-20, the Pareto principle, also exists within the context of, you look at something like the S&P. If you look at the S&P, every century or so, only about 20% of the businesses that started in, let's say, 1900 will still be in that. And many of them, an even higher portion, will actually just no longer be in business, right? Because businesses change, industries change. So even if you really like print media, or even if you like horses and carriages, right? Yeah. The reality is those industries they don't exist anymore. No. So you've got to pick something, if you're building your career, like Salesforce, which is going to accelerate. I mean, Sabin has built an incredible company, but over the last 25 years, the trajectory of Salesforce is unbelievable, and you've got to be part of that rising tide. So pick a profession, pick an industry, pick an organization where you feel there's going to be plenty of opportunities. And the third thing is something that everyone probably knows, every sort of, teenager, every student that's out there, they don't want me to say it, but I'm going to say it anyway, which is, everything you want is on the other side of fear and hard work. I mean, and that's it, right? And there is no ultimate substitute. Yes, you need to be smart, and yes, you need a little bit of luck, and yes, but just do it. Go for it. Like, whatever you do, whatever chance you get, just throw yourself into it with alacrity and indomitable spirit, and just go for it. And don't, no matter what setbacks you have, don't think the world is after you, or you'll never get the recognition. It will happen. It will come. But it's just hard work, right? But if you're willing to do it, and if you're willing to when faced with 2 choices, take the more daring, take the one that scares you, the thing that scares you, it's on the other side of that fear where you'll find what it is you're supposed to be doing. And, it's not a dress rehearsal. This is the play, right?
Absolutely.
So just go for it.
And, again, as you were speaking, I'm thinking, so I play golf, right? And Gary Player was a very famous golfer. And a saying that he said was, the harder I work, the luckier I get. And that plays in my brain all the time. And just, have you got any sort of mantras or mottos in your head? GE basically would say, energy, enthusiasm, and empathy in equal measure for a good salesperson. So that was the GE Capital sort of mantra. Yeah, and when I used to talk to my sales teams, I used to say that to them. You need the energy to get up in the morning. You need that enthusiasm because it's infectious, but you need the empathy to put yourself in the shoes of the other person, right? Especially in a transformative sales process. Is there mottos that you sort of swear by? I mean, I know you've got loads, but are there mottos that sort of spring to mind? Because the harder I work, the luckier I get is all the way through my career. So I think Pareto law, which is why we're doing this, that one, the harder I work, the luckier I get, and the 3 E's. They're my three. But have you got one top of mind? I don't want to put you on the spot.
No. I mean, I do. I mean, it's really the hustle and the grit.
Yes.
I mean, the grit is the determination that you want to do something, and the hustle is what drives you.
Yeah.
And I'm all about looking for hustle in people. Do they really want to do this? I mean, my number plate is hustle 1 as well. It's just that's what I live by every day, and tell my kids as well that I got to see the hustle in you. I got to see the hustle. I don't see the hustle in you. You're not going to make it, And that's just life. And maybe it's the way I grew up in Mumbai, and you had to hustle every day, to get to school or walk. And, that is what ultimately, that gives you the energy, right? I mean, it's very easy to say I'm tired. Well, your body's not tired, as long as your mind is active.
Yes.
Your body will keep up with you. And I think a lot of people ask me that, how do I stay up?
Yeah.
But it's really the mind. If you want to do it, your body will stay up.
Yeah.
So. But I agree, like what George said for kids. I mean, the other thing, and I do a lot of talks with little kids and young kids as well, and just career and advice. I think Salesforce is a great place, a perfect place for them to start, because I think what Salesforce solves is business problems, across the different clouds. You're doing sales transformation, marketing, customer service transformation. Mm-hmm. The DNA of a company, those are all the building blocks. And I think going through the Salesforce transformations, you are actually learning business. Right? Unlike building a website or putting a financial model together, you're actually understanding how a business operates, because it is focused on the business, not on building an external website for customers, right? Yeah. So for the younger generation, it's a great place to start, because at the end of the day, whatever you do, you need to understand how a company operates. The DNA, the genetics of every company is the same, right? It's just how the data flows and what they do. But at its core, it's still the same. It's almost like a body, the way it functions, whether it's manufacturing a product to doing marketing to selling or service. And those are the areas that Salesforce touches. So Trailblazer and understanding all those different clouds, and you'll eventually put it together in your head. Yeah. And that, I think, is a strong foundation, I was a technologist, and my degrees were in technology, but I think where it really clicked for me was when I did the MBA.
Right.
That was very critical for this journey.
Right.
And I did it at the same time we started the company. So that really connected all the dots for me as we were building. So.
That's interesting. That's interesting. George, mottos, themes?
Yeah, I'm going to come to one. I'll give you an allegory in a second, but what Sabin is probably too modest to tell you is that he was working a full-time job. Yeah. He had 2 kids, and a wife, and would have to sort of do his homework in the evenings, travel overnight, get changed in bathrooms, and go to do his MBA on the weekend, because of exactly that. He believed in what he was doing, and he was willing to back it, and he was willing to work so incredibly hard. And so it's easy to look at Sabin now and say, okay, he's successful, and found his great company, and all this kind of stuff, bootstrapped it all, amazing. But that didn't just come. That wasn't luck. There was no trust fund, right? There's nothing like that. I mean, it's all about hard work. The world is not out to get you, and you've got to. If all you do is you look upon the world and you look upon your future career with pessimism, then you just got to look with better eyes than that, because the world is so much full of opportunity. And I heard this thing, and it's going to sound a little bit sort of somber to begin with, but just work with me. There's a guy called Sam Harris who has this sort of like meditation podcast. And he had this sort of allegory, if you like, recently, and he said he was having he was at dinner with his wife and his couple of kids, and he was just sad. Everyone was on the phone. He was just in a bad mood, had a bad day at work, whatever it might be. And he had this realization at that time. For whatever reason, I can't remember what it was. He had an appointment with the doctor next day, something minor. But he said, imagine if he went to the doctor that next day, or he got a phone call and the doc said, "Look, I'm sorry, Sam, but that's it. You've got a month to live," or whatever it is. Yeah. He said, what would you not do to be back at the dinner table the evening before with the blissful ignorance and your family around you, and seemingly all of life's possibilities in front of you? What would you not do? And there's something philosophically interesting and actually I think quite positive about knowing that this is it and there's an end, and we all know that call's coming, right? It's a paradox, because we all know that call's coming for us all. One day we will all get that call about ourselves or someone else, and to not experience life, and to get to that point and feel like you had focused on the wrong things or concentrated on the wrong things, that you'd wasted your time caring about silly things or thinking that the world was after you when it wasn't, and you left any sort of energy or opportunity on the table, anything you wanted to do that you thought there was always going to be time to do, and knowing that there is a finite amount of time and opportunity, and that there is no one standing in the way other than yourself, is, I think, a confirming thing, and a reinforcing thing, and whenever I'm having a bad day, and whenever I'm annoyed at my kids or my wife, or they're annoyed at me, I'm just having like I think, gee, how lucky, and I think Jimmy Carr said it actually in a podcast recently. He said, if I met you in 25 years, you would give me everything you own and all the money you had if I could bring you back to this moment in time, to be as young and healthy as you are at this moment. And we don't often think about that, right? And when you're old, like me and you, and especially Sabin, it's so much more obvious. But when you're leaving university, it's not that obvious. You think the show's never going to stop. It will stop, but gee, you can enjoy your journey.
Yeah.
You just got to have the courage to do it.
There was an American journalist, newscaster, that said something, about 30 years ago, and that, really hit me, And he said the worst it ever gets for someone, the worst it gets for you is probably the best it'll ever get for some people.
Yeah.
So just
move
on.
Yes. Yeah. And actually, you're a Geordie, and the Newcastle are playing phenomenal football at the moment. The football guys always say something along the lines of hard work beats lazy talent every day of the week. Is that the saying? I'm pretty sure it's the saying, but is the manager saying, I've got the talented players and I've got the hard-working players, and I'll take the hard-working players all day long because they're the ones that will give me... And if you think that analogy through in football, I mean, we're talking football, but it could be across all sports, right? I find that whole sort of mentality right, and you've mentioned it in this podcast about the hard work. We can't get away from hard work, but it's actually leaning into the hard work. Like you get back to your point about business, it's fun, isn't it? I mean, look at us now. We're filming a podcast, and then yesterday we were in client meetings, or we're talking to our colleagues about a particular new release on the software. We release three releases of software for free every year onto our software, so it's constantly changing with Salesforce, and the values that we have, trust number one, and equality, and innovation, etc. These are things that are very synonymous with Salesforce, but it makes it fun, doesn't it? And there are days when it's hard work. There are days when it's really hard work and boring. But then you've got all these other things that you're doing, and it makes up for those days, and those days you need to put those days in to get the good days.
Every day is hard work. I mean, you shouldn't even think about it. It's work.
And if it's not hard work, you're not doing it right. But yesterday, promise you it's true, yesterday I was in Saudi Arabia, I was in Riyadh, I was speaking to a medical institution, and we were talking, of course, about, Salesforce was talking about IT systems, and you might say, oh, gee, that's boring. But I'll tell you what we were actually doing. We were saying, look, what we think we can do through dint of the customer experience we offer people, the data we collect, the digital experiences we orchestrate for them,
yes.
we think we can change health outcomes. We think that, of course, we as Horizontal have nothing to say about, medicine or, the efficacy
yes.
of this medicine or this treatment,
yes.
but we're not about the product. But we think a lot of medicine, look at the placebo effect, a lot of medicine and a lot of how people feel and perceive is related to the content and the information they receive. Do they receive the guidance timely? If it's a sort of a medical tourism of someone travelling in, how do we orchestrate that whole journey? How do we put them at ease? How do we make sure that they see video content from the medical professional, they understand the medical professional's
yes.
sort of choice? These things obviously are not medicine, and you wouldn't even want to say they're placebo effect, but they do meaningfully impact the perception and the behaviour of parents looking after sick children. It puts their mind at ease. It can remind you to take your medicine on time.
Yes.
All of these things around experience are meaningfully important. And for any student out there thinking, I don't want to work in IT. I mean, trust me, I didn't want to work in IT, and I've never done an IT course in my life. But actually, what are we doing? We're providing both competitive advantage and changing customers' behaviours, through dint of the experience we offer them on Salesforce, yes. And that is super interesting.
Yeah.
And you can have that. You can be a part of meaningfully impacting people's lives across the board. The only thing standing between you and that is hard work.
Yeah, and I'm going to finish off. Gentlemen, it would be remiss of me if I didn't talk about Agent Force. So Agent Force is the Salesforce agentic solution, and rather than me tell you what I believe it to be, what do you believe it is? And to go back to the medical, Mark Benioff, our founder, basically talks about how that can really help the health industry. But really, what's your take on Agent Force and what it can do in that sort of agentic workforce that we're looking at for the future? Put that sort of the horizontal spin on that, please.
Agent Force and really the whole agentic technology and is a great advancement we have that we can finally leverage. It can bring a lot of efficiency into a business, right? But the biggest thing in order for us to really achieve any of that is for customers to get their data together, because at the end of the day, agents need data. They don't just create it, they consume it and create outcomes and recommendations, etc. And most organizations even today struggle with bringing all the right data together. Mm-hmm. If you don't have your data clean, garbage in, garbage out, right? The agent's not going to do anything correct if you're not feeding it the right data.
Sure.
So certainly it's a great technology that can bring a lot of benefits, but the foundational data needs to be ready, which is where the data cloud becomes so critical.
Yes.
And I think people forget that you need to complete those projects.
So for you, it's the data strategy first and foremost before you then look at how the agent can enhance current processes.
Yeah, you can do proof of concepts with small subsets of data, saying how can this actually benefit us.
Yes, and do that. Horizontal
we do that. We've got a few going on here. But at the end of the day, to fully realize the benefits, you then have to harness all of the data and have a clear plan in terms of what are the outcomes you're driving for and how does that data with agent technology allow you to do that. Because getting the data in itself is a massive project or an effort,
Sure. George?
So I think Agent Force is a game changer. And I know that... everything, gets this kind of, fad de jour, game changer. But if you think about AI in general, excuse me, if you think about AI in general and you think about, Salesforce specific evolution of it, I think it's meaningful. And let me put that in perspective. We started a place at one end of the spectrum a few decades ago with nothing more than a C prompt. Anyone trying to do code back in the day, anyone trying to communicate with a computer would have to go right down to nothing more than a screen with a flash and C prompt, or some kind of, low-level language.
Yes.
And then that changes to, say, a graphical user interface, right, where things become a little bit more intuitive. And then it goes and it starts getting all the way down the sort of the journey where you less and less have to meet the computer on language it understands, BASIC or assembler or C++, and more it's beginning to meet you and understand what you're saying. And so, sure, you're going from, well-orchestrated graphical user interfaces. You go into, 5 years ago or so, you'll go into a place of conversational UI with Alexa, whatever. The breakthrough within AI, and specific to large language models but beyond, is that it's the first time that the actual system can take data and produce knowledge. They understand and comprehend what we are trying to achieve. Now, and the natural language of which we were speaking. So you can now, instruct systems, and systems will do things, and they will make decisions on your behalf in the way you want to make them, through bent of natural conversation. And so it's that evolution where the computer is understanding more and more of what the human means. Now, in a business that's interesting as a consumer, but in a business context, what that means is that just as machines replaced, engineers and, up and up, we're getting to a place where, if we're moving from, as I said at the beginning, a place where production was where the competitive advantage is, through to consumption, now we're at a place of really orchestration and decisioning, where the system itself, sure, with certain humans in the loop, etc., and agents, which are effectively just an iterative version of large language models speaking to each other and connecting out, to different tools and different services, At its core, that can start to make decisions for you. So really, the bit left, what is the bit left that no system can do? And ultimately, and what I'm broadly going to say is that strategy. So if you are a brand, you are looking for, your marketing department is looking more and more like, for example, a newsroom, a traditional newsroom. You're going to have a big vision editor thing, given a sort of a vision for what that paper or magazine should be. And you're going to have detailed copywriters, humans in a loop, checking, governing, etc. But most of the rest of the print, most of the rest of the newsroom will be done by, decisioning systems. Yeah. So really, those are sort of jobs less for human, and that big editorial, the vision. I think the future of most businesses, because of something like Agentforce, the digital virtual labor and decisioning, with guardrails and all the great stuff that Salesforce gets you. And you don't want some sort of Frankenstein's monster of LLMs that your cousin down the road put together, or some startup. You want something with data that's secure, the guardrails, in place, which you've already got within system. And to Sabin's point, you want to be able to rely not just on the structured data in your CRM, but the unstructured data that Data Cloud will give you. You can begin to call a strategy and allow the systems to do most of the rest of the work and actually executing on that strategy. You don't need to build the workflows, you don't need to do sort of detail. They will do that as long as you are clear, and this is the crucial point with agents, you need to be clear, what does success look like? What is the strategic imperative? And because the agent won't be able to tell you that. They will figure out how many steps they need to go, and they'll iterate through, and they'll figure out the best example, they'll do it really quickly. They'll get to the end decision, be they acting as a call center agent, or be they, creating an article or an image. They will figure out how to get there, but you need to tell them, what does success look like? What am I looking to achieve? What is my strategy? And so increasingly, the successful businesses will, of course, they'll have an enterprise software, most obviously Salesforce as part of the backbone of their technology. They'll have the agents and the virtual labor, with Data Cloud in place to actually to be that kind of virtual labor, low operational costs. But they will also have resolutely and crystal clear strategy, so that they can guide that virtual labor to basically do their bidding. And if they do that right, they will have not just the success, not just provide the value for their customers, but they'll do it at an incredibly low operational point, and they will keep the institutional knowledge within that code base, right? And the one last stat I'll give you, which I think is the most meaningful stat I've ever heard in my career, right? Which I think speaks directly to AI, is that when I was born, the S&P 500, right? The S&P 500, the 500 largest companies in America, listed companies in America. When I was born, back in the 1970s, it's a long time ago, each each P&L
Yes.
of every company basically has two types of assets, which are all its value. It has tangible assets and intangible assets. Right? Tangible assets are stuff you can touch. Their offices, their tables, their cash, their product, their warehouses. Intangible assets are things you can't touch and hold. They're most obviously brand, their software, and their data. Right? Things you can't strip down and sell off.
Yeah.
Right? Now, if we were right that actually the growth of business and the competitive advantage they have is within software, data, and brand, those three things are the best accountancy proxy we've got for customer experience and all the great things that Salesforce does, right? So if we were right, then that number should have grown. The value of those intangible assets on their balance sheet should have grown. So in my lifetime, when I was born, the percentage of value of the S&P 500 for intangible assets was 16%, 16%.
Yeah.
The rest, 84%, was all the stuff you could strip down. Offices, cash, tangible assets. Yes. What is that number today? Do you know?
Or it's going to be high, isn't it?
Well, if I were to tell you it was 50-50, that would be extraordinary, right?
Yes.
If I was to tell you it was 50% of the value you couldn't touch and hold, that, and you can Google this, this is the thing, Matt. The intangible assets of the S&P 500 today is 90%, 90, which means 9/10 of the value of every organisation. The biggest 500 companies listed in the S&P in America, I mean, all countries the same, is stuff you can't. It's not the assets. So, for example, if someone gave you Amazon and they said you can either have the tangible assets, the stock, the warehouses, all that kind of stuff, or you can have the brand, the website, and the data, the customer data. Which one would you take? If you take the stock, you are crazy,
right?
Because that is going to be probably in that case less than 10% the value. The value of the business, the competitive advantage of that business, is in the customer experience, the very thing that Salesforce orchestrate for you, right?
Yes.
It is in the data, it is in their brand, and it is in the software, and increasingly AI will only accelerate that trend because it is able, better than a human, to work within brand guidelines and embody the personality of their brand. It's obviously using and built from software, and crucially, it retains that data. It doesn't walk out the door when that employee leaves, right? And it's that ability, and that's why agents are going to extend that even further, and that's the opportunity, and that's obviously why Sabin's built a company around Salesforce.
Well, I think I want to add to that. I think we said data again, going back to the point on data. It's important. I mean, even if you open ChatGPT up, there's a disclaimer that they can't, correctly tell you that the data is accurate because they're pulling from data sources.
From all different places,
Yeah. So I mean, at the end of the day, even the large language models they're learning from data.
Yes.
So they're limited by the data that you can provide. That's why data is so important before you embark on something, right?
Yes.
The other thing, also getting to the point, as a human being, every time we think about something, there's 9 billion neurotransmitters that fire in our brain to make that decision. 9 billion. So if you think about agents and how much processing they need to do, we've got a long way to go in terms of it truly becoming that digital labor. We're at the early stages of it. I'm not saying we can't, right? But that's what we're trying to replicate is human behavior. Think like us.
Yes.
So,
gentlemen, thank you so much for coming in today and talking. I mean, it's such an insightful conversation. I knew it would be, so thank you very, very much for that. 28th of May. What's happening on 28th of May? It's the Salesforce Agentforce World Tour at the Madinat Conference Centre in Dubai. Now, you have been Emerald sponsored for the last few years, and you're Emerald sponsor again. So, first and foremost, thank you. But what does Emerald sponsor mean, and what will our guests and our clients and our potential partners see on your stand on that day?
Well, I'm not going to tell you what they're going to see. So anyone who turned up to last year's event may have noticed a huge 8-foot robot walking around, and the element of surprise was key to that. We believe in asking for forgiveness rather than permission, Matt, as you know. What you'll not be able to see off camera is, our marketing guy Dharmesh, sweating over his career about the pressure and the sleepless nights he's having to top our 8-foot robot. not.
Yeah.
So my advice to you, and my advice to anyone, is to turn up to Agent Force, and see the spectacular show that Salesforce put on, and also see what it is that Horizontal are going to do to top that 8-foot robot this year.
I love that. Thank you. And
I think for me, of course, I can't wait for the surprise either. They won't show me what it is.
Oh, really? They're not even showing you?
No, although I just have to sign the checks.
Yeah.
Which is fine.
Fine.
Seeing what they did last year, I'm sure there's a nice surprise.
Yeah.
But what I, am really looking forward to, meeting the entire Salesforce ecosystem, and there's some new leadership in town as well.
That's right, yes.
So it's delighted to see this is Mohammed's first one.
Yes.
So really excited of, all the prospects we're going to expect to see, and also our existing customers. But more importantly, I'm delighted to present that 20% of our team that drives success in the region for us. A lot of them are going to be there to talk to our customers and our prospects and understand where they're trying to go within the Salesforce ecosystem, offer them ideas, talk about Agent Force a little bit and how we can help and what we have done before. That is where the excitement is for me, is meeting prospects and customers and hearing from Salesforce what's ahead in this
the
region.
roadmap. Yeah, fantastic. So that's 28th of May, Madinah Hotel Conference Centre in Dubai for the biggest event of the year for the region. Thank you very much, Horizontal. This has been the 80/20 Performance Podcast.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.